Hello again. What a beautiful day it is out here today. Not like that night, the great blizzard of 1891. That's a night that I will never forget. I can see him now, Anders Jonsson, coming into the cottage, freezing cold, dripping wet, wrapping blankets around him, giving him warm drinks and sitting him down to hear his tale. And all the men, Mr. Perry and the crew, they went out to find the others. Whether they were dead or they were alive, they went to find them. And a few came back to the cottage, and we heard their tales. That's what I'm going to share with you today. But others, they were unaccounted for. Some people round here, they say that perhaps they went to live with the merfolk and are now walking the seabed for the rest of their days. Do you know, there was one old fisherman who found a body washed up upon the shore, dead as a doornail. But around his neck he had the gills of a fish, which meant he could have breathed underwater. Human beings breathing underwater, it's the stuff of folk tales and superstition. We heard the real stories from the real survivors of the Marana that night. And I can tell you one of them. There was one of the gentlemen. He said that they dived into the lifeboats with a splash. They were more shocked than scared by the icy water, and they sailed away from the sinking wreck as fast as they could. But the wind, for all of its gusto, was not moving the ship at all. It was slow and stuck because that night it wasn't just the weather that had been turned upside down. It was like the wildlife, and all the rules of nature had been capsized. And one of the brave sailors, well, he put his hand, cold though it was, into the water. And he felt jellyfish. Thousands of them, washed in on the wind. He saw the bloom of the jellyfish and he warned the others, "Careful!" But the men stood up, and as that sailor turned around to move into the wind to go faster, those men, they fell into the dark waters. On sailed the brave sailor, heading to the shore, riding the rough waves, just trying to make it home, when it seemed as though the boat began to gather water and sink, and he looked down, and out of the bottom of the ship came a tentacle like a snake, but no, an octopus. And as the octopus ate the bottom of the boat, making a bigger and bigger hole in it, and the water filled and more of the tentacles came through, well, the hole was so big that although this sailor warned the other sailors, 5 of them slipped through, blop, 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 down into the icy waters. On went the brave soldier. Still some crew remained, and they headed for the shore. They could see the light of the lighthouse now, and on they went. But debris was flying everywhere on the wildness of that night. And the sailor, he saw a plank of wood coming towards them. "Wait! Duck!" said the sailor, but none listened in time. And that piece of wood, well, it knocked some of those sailors, and more fell into the water. And on they went. On he went, exhausted, full of grief from the loss of his comrades, until they came to the shore, and the boat was smashed into the rocks. Well, that sailor, he climbed up the rocks, and he made his way to the cottage of me and Mr. Perry. And the others, well, it seems that they were lost at sea. And that poor man, I can still remember the sorrow in his eyes and the shiver of his blue trembling lips as he told me that tale of how he, Anders Jonsson, and one more sailor survived. And that meant that there was one man still unaccounted for. And the years went past, and Everybody assumed that he had been lost at sea. But I have got another strange story to tell you about what happened to that man, and most of all, how I came to know it. Oh, it's great to be out here under the open skies and by the sea. Get out of the house for a bit. The sea's quite choppy today, but nothing like it was 4 years ago. And that's what I'm going to tell you about now. 4 long years ago was when the Marana was shipwrecked off Start Point. And me and Mr. Perry, we were heading over to see Mr. and Mrs. Briggs, who live up at the lighthouse. And we were there just visiting, as you do, when Mrs. Briggs saw out of the window a strange creature that was heading our way. And as this creature got closer, we could see that it was a bedraggled man. His hair sticky with salt from the sea, an enormous beard, and he was wet with ragged clothes. Well, we invited him in. He was in a terrible state. Mr. Briggs called for the doctor. Mrs. Briggs sent message to his family. And I made him a piping hot cup of tea. He said he'd never had a cup of tea that tasted so good. The first thing he told us was that he was the captain of the Marana. Well, if we're really honest, we thought that perhaps he was a little confused after his sea time adventure. But from what he told us, it turned out that it was true. Let me take you right back to that night. Because the captain, he watched all 27 of his men jump into the lifeboats off that sinking ship. And himself, as he watched the ship pointing downwards into the sea, with his numb, icy hands, he pulled up a plank of wood from the ship. And clinging it to his body, he leapt over the side of the boat and into the waters. He was full of terror and full of fear, and he clung onto it with all of his might. And he watched the lifeboats sailing far into the distance. And then the captain blacked out, and he could remember no more. And the story really begins when he opened his eyes. And he was in a beautiful place, a sunny day like this, with heat and warmth on his face. He could see, he told us, palm trees they were called, and white sands. He said it was a kind of paradise, but after some time he realised that he was the only person there, and that paradise turned into a nightmare. But that mariner, he was a resourceful man, a strong man, and he knew that he had to survive, and he did everything that he could. He found food, water, and shelter. There wasn't a lot of food. He told us about these things called coconuts. Brown, he said they were, hairy on the outside, but that when you smashed them open on a rock, they revealed white inside that you could eat, and water. Water inside a coconut. So he drank that, and he saved the fresh water from the streams and the rainwater in some of these coconut shells. And he lived there every day, looking out to sea, waiting to see if he could see other ships and other boats. 4 long years. Nothing and nobody came. He felt so alone. And it was then that he decided that he would make a raft and escape. He got a new energy in 1 week, and he gathered all that he needed. The wood, he made bits of rope from things like this, and he bound it together, and he collected the water and the coconuts, and he was ready. He'd grown fond of his island, and he pushed away, saying goodbye to it, out once more into the open seas, where he chopped and sailed around on the choppy waters. And one day there was a boat. It looked enormous to him, a great grey steamer, and he heard the sound of its horn. And although he called out and cried, nobody heard him. And so he got out from his pocket a piece of sea glass, and in the sun he shone the glass like a torch beam, and some of the sailors saw it. They saw him and they rescued him and put him on board, and he told them his story. And they agreed that after all that he had been through, they would take him home to the exact spot from which he had left, to Start Point. And that day he had been set out onto his homeland and walked up to us, up to the lighthouse, and told us this story. Well, afterwards, he settled in the village here, and he had a little grandson called Billy. And Billy was always asking his grandpa about his adventures. Billy and all of his family, they felt that this captain and this returned sailor from the shipwrecked Marana was really a hero. Billy, he knows all about the sinking of that great steamship, the Marana, in March 1891, the time of that great blizzard. And now I'd better go back up to the Coast Guard's cottage and finish making my scones.